folks. Welcome to It Matters Radio. This is Monica Brinkman, and I, along with Mr. Kenneth Ween, will be hosting the show today. And we have a wonderful guest today, and she's coming forward to talk about something that's very important to the country and the world. And Ken has a book that he's gonna, there it is, isn't it beautiful? And it's called Furthest from the Gate. Now, what could that be about? Well, we're gonna talk about it today a little bit. And Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, I'm so happy that you decided to write the books that you are writing, because I don't think people understand nowadays what it's like to be part of the LGBT community and what you face. And you certainly faced things from quite a long while ago when it was much different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, not only long ago, although we don't want to age you too much, Ann.
Thank you.
But also in a part of the country where being LBGT, and now of course we add Q, was even less acceptable. You grew up in Phoenix. And so you've written this, it's a fictionalized memoir. Mm-hmm. What that means, folks, is that while it's based very strongly on your life, you have created some fictional parts to it and to flesh it out. But one of the things that's very interesting in here is that not only is there a heroine, whose life story it is, but there's also a very interesting hero, two narratives going on. One narrative is the story told in, story form with a narrator, and the other is epistological. It's based on letters, and they're letters from a second hero who is really based on somebody out of your life, your own uncle. And in the book, it is the uncle's letters. And they perhaps, I really want to talk about Uncle, because I think he, in the book, and I would guess in your life, very, very real and important character.
Yes. So my Uncle Ed, and he was so much of a different kind of person. He was so incredibly skilled with words, a great artist, humorist, never followed the standard path of what we assume children will grow up and do. Also a raging alcoholic. I think it would be fair to say, and I should say, that he was, larger than life in my eyes and my sister and brother's eyes, but he came and went in and out of our lives periodically, because he was so nomadic and he would be in different places. But I know that the life that he had with his immediate family was very much a roller coaster, very rough, because of the booze. So so my cousins have a very different tale than I do, but he could be that way. Same with the grandmother character. She's a very different grandmother in real life than she was a mother, which is often the case, right? Sometimes people finally get it right by the time they're grandparents. So there's a very humanist part to that, but one of the things that is so strong is the letters that he wrote to my mother. And what I didn't publish is the flip side of that coin. The letters that she wrote back. And it's kind of like our own little personal archive in our family. all these letters that my sister and brother and I share, and our cousins, because it was an unbelievable friendship between a sister and a brother.
It's just so wonderful you have those.
Yeah.
You know, many people don't have something so precious where after someone's gone, they could look back at them.
And
Bring to life again.
yeah.
It's so important in the book, because I do want to talk about Furthest from the Gate. What makes them so important and makes the uncle so important is, and I was wondering if this was true in your own life, that your first person who acknowledged you, the first adult person, not, first adult person in your life who acknowledged your sexual identity was the uncle.
No, because by the time, so this is where it like I said, the parts that are the most realistic are the present day scenes between the young woman who's really middle-aged almost when it starts, and the mother who is suffering from dementia, and is, her ability to know and be the person she was throughout her life, that is sunsetting for forever.
Mm-hmm.
Those are almost verbatim conversations that I had with my own mother. Mm-hmm. Furthest from the Gate took about 10 years to write, and I could never really figure out how to finish it. And then when my mom took ill around 2005, it became more obvious what I needed to do. And it just kind of dawned. Mm-hmm. I actually didn't come out until I was almost 30.
Oh.
I was married. I had a child. And it was really through my writing and through writing a big piece of this book. When you're sitting away, typing away, the kid's in the other room asleep, and suddenly you realize you're writing about yourself. And that was like a ton of bricks.
That had to be a profound moment.
It was just like, oh my gosh. And then what you do for that with that information is, that was one of the darkest times of my life. But in answer to your question, Ken, where I went with that was, this was more of a what if then. What I imagine, had I come out much earlier, kind of what would have transpired. And yes, I imagine that if I had come out in high school, he would have been a huge advocate for that piece. My father would have been more accepting of it. My mother would have taken quite a while to come around because she was a very devout Catholic. And for her, it was, you had to be, you followed between the lines. And that helped her deal with the world.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, this would have been outside the lines.
Certainly would have been.
Yeah, not sure there would have been any lines, but so in that respect, it was almost like a what if sort of a piece at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you do when you've lived the life that you've been taught to live? You've done everything that society has told you, and you wake up one day and realize that this has all been a lie, that you haven't been true to yourself.
Well, and I'd like to think I'm a pretty reflective kind of person, and so that I think the first thing that I did was I had to go back. I instantly picked up a journal and I started writing. It's because how the heck do I miss this? And what I realized was I really wasn't missing it. But I was constantly just pushing it over to the side.
Ignoring it like it wasn't there.
That's no big deal. And, in my own personal life, this was, the 70s in Phoenix, there was 70s and 80s. So, even people who were out it was all very quiet.
Yes.
Kind of like talking about cancer, you just... quiet about that, so you don't really say anything. But it took me about 6 months, and I finally had to tell my ex-husband. And to his credit, we were sitting in a tent having a little bit of a fight. He said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I think I'm gay." And he said, the first words out of his mouth were, "Well, I'm not going on Jerry Springer." That gets, he got a lot of points for that. So
Yes.
that was, but then it began the very, very difficult road of having to step away from that. Our son was very, very young, and in his mind, I've always been gay, because I think it would have, I'm very much a practical person. So when you see writing on the wall, you read it.
Yes.
And that's the way that I operate as a human being with other human beings. And so I, okay, then what do we do about that? Because I certainly knew that, once you know something about yourself, if you suppress it, if you bury it again, that's, I think, where it becomes unlivable for a lot of people. And,
Yeah, because it's always there, no matter what you do.
right.
Yeah, you can't hide from who you are.
No, and it changed, it changed a lot of things, and it also very much took me into that realm of having to, because I went back to education as a teacher, but now it was as a gay woman, and that was a very different experience. I did not feel, I came out the same year, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the company, and I'll say the name, the company was the Arizona State Supreme Court case, forget the gentleman's name, versus Golden State Container.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, they ruled in 1993 that it was, LGBTQ folks were not a protected class and therefore could be fired. So I come out, and that's kind of like the first thing that happened. It's like, okay, you have reminded me of this. And so I was very, very careful as a teacher about who I told. And then I went into administration, and that even got more interesting. I wound up being an administrator in my son's school. And my wife and I, we were already together by then. We'd been together for almost 26 years. Everybody as parents, they knew we were out. They knew we were gay. Mm-hmm. So to come into that school district as an administrator, I didn't announce it to anybody, but most everybody knew.
Right. It was just something that was never said.
Right, because it's not really professional to, you don't stand around and talk about your personal life to kids and to, parents.
Of course, I should point out, because I do know from living in Phoenix, that school district is one of the most liberal and one of the academically best districts in the Phoenix area. And I would guess that was kind of partly why Anne was able to do well there, but also partly why it became so good was because she was there. So it was kind of like this positive mix.
Yeah, it is, and it's it's Central Phoenix. You have a lot of highly educated people, a lot of people who are kind of involved in current events, and certainly when you talk about the LGBTQ community itself, Central Phoenix is the hub. Mm-hmm. There used to be a statistic, and I doubt it's true anymore, but Phoenix had more gay and lesbian bars in a single square mile than anywhere else in the world. Because
I can believe that. One of my editors from some of my novels is gay, and he liked very much for us to go out and have a drink, to talk or what have you. And it was constantly amazing to me because he was always taking me to a gay bar, and it was always a different bar.
So many to choose from, so.
I can believe that. Now, in your book, you gave it this title, Furthest from the Gate. And I wanted to talk a little about what that title evoked in me. But first I wanted to ask you why you chose that title.
Yes.
And it comes up in the first chapter. It was one of the days I was visiting my mother at her care facility, and her routine was pretty much the same. She got up, they ate, and then she would go out and sit in the great room. So she's surrounded by all of these other people, and she was, in the scope of how old she died at 67. So very young, and compared to some of these men and women around who were clearly in their mid to late 80s, 90s. And I just started looking at all of them one day and watching them and looking at their faces and realizing, and living the experience with my mom, realizing that I wanted to shout out and jump up and say, this isn't my mom. This isn't really the person that she was. And so I recognized that was true of everybody else in the room. If their loved one was sitting right there, they would be saying, that's not my dad. That's not how he acts. And they all had their life, and so I got to thinking about, are they good people? Who in here is evil? Is there anybody in here that we would classify like that? So in other words, if St. Peter were to line everybody up from good to evil, where do you stand? And, so the gate is St. Peter's gate. And then it also made me realize that when we talk about people in the gay and lesbian community, depending on who you talk to, they're definitely, way in the back, or, maybe somewhere in the middle, just from the fact of being gay, regardless of their life accomplishments. So that's really where the story came from, is the hidden stories that we all have. And of course, I'm really not a person who believes that everything, you're good or bad, or you're evil, or we're all a mix. I really, truly believe that. But in terms of the book, it was more about where were these people as people before they became the shells of themselves by this horrible, awful disease.
And then, of course, it comes echoing back toward the end of the book when your character, your principal character, your narrator, is in the funeral, in the cemetery, visiting, burying her mother, and then visiting her uncle's grave, and in dealing with, again, this implication of furthest from the gate. And then I started playing with that in my own head a bit. And I said, where do we want to be in terms of that, some kind of standard like that? And it occurred to me that I would much rather in my life like the uncle. Yeah, he's been an iconoclast, an oddball, he's a drunk, and I wouldn't want that, and I wouldn't want the suffering he's inflicted on people. But I'd rather be that different character than the conformist. But where do we fall? And really, isn't that more the issue than evil and good that matters in us, but rather to what degree we balance conformity and individuality?
Agreed. And I think it goes to, and in the end, where my mind personally goes is, it's who has the right to sit in judgment of another soul?
Yes.
That really it's not about that everybody is so, that's the thing about humans, we're such a mess, in so many ways. But we have such redeeming qualities. I mean, I think we're seeing this right now in our world, of this real mix of the really strong positive qualities of humans and the really sad, sad parts.
It's almost like it's just bringing all of it out.
Yes.
It's revealing everything.
Yes. And I think that's very sobering for a lot of people. I mean, when you think about the last few years and how far, just looking at racial issues, I think we all kind of were feeling pretty good at the end of Obama. Those of us who voted for Obama and believed in him as a leader, and hey, we're doing pretty good. And then in the last 3.5 years, it's almost like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
Almost all the good that was done has been taken away.
The pendulum of history.
Yes. It is. It's the pendulum, and it's swinging back and forth. And I've always felt as an author that one of the things I very much enjoy doing, and I do it probably in nearly every one of my books, is there's at least one character who isn't what they seem. And so I go to great lengths to, as I'm building the character, to remember how the reader is interpreting the character. Mm-hmm. What are the possible ways the reader is seeing this character? Because in the end, there's a twist, there's a surprise.
Oh, I love this type of books.
Yeah.
I love your book.
I think it's a good thing for us to remember that so many people are not what they seem. That's
right.
And often the veneer that we present to the world is that the goodness, and the conformity, when in reality, deep down inside, Yeah. But now, one of the things that we were just talking about, the pendulum of history, and we've gone on the subject of race, but I think right now, much more is LGBTQ, that we have gone very dramatically from a time in history not long ago, where, and I think very, very interestingly, the President of the United States at that point said, well, I changed my mind because I was talking to my young daughters, which I thought was such a wonderful, positive thing for him to have said. And of course, we're talking about Mr. Obama.
Right.
And he was talking about gay rights and the right of people to marry, the right of people to serve in the military, and the right of somebody to say, I want to go to and fight for my country and maybe die. I mean, he wasn't talking about, some kind of privilege to, I get extra money from the government or something. It was my right to be a citizen, my right to be a person. And having sat at dinner with his two daughters and been questioned by them about these values, he changed his mind. And at that moment, when I heard that on the news, when I listened to him speak about it, a thrill went through my body. I really teared up. It was like one of the most wonderful things I'd ever heard a leader do.
Yeah.
And
he admitted
now
he was wrong in his
thinking. More than that, he listened to his daughters. Yeah. Not even listened to his children, his daughters. Empowering them, empowering women, changing the sexual dynamic. It was such a moment of history.
Yeah.
And now we are seeing that swing back. And I think that one of the issues, then it got to the T. And, well, what about this male to female or female to male? If they wanted to, let's say, this male to female, and she wants to take part in sports, or which bathroom this male is, and it all went crashing back down. Oh, the poor women. We have to protect our women. And all of a sudden, I heard people wearing white hoods. So help me God, I hear people in white hoods, protect white women, protect white. And I think to myself, oh my God, for every action, there's not an equal and opposite reaction. For every action, there's a sickness.
Well, this statement in itself that they made is so redundant. I mean, come on, you've got people that were male who associate with female. So how are they going to hurt the females if they use their bathroom?
Yeah, it's yeah. It's not funny. I'm not laughing in that respect. It's one of those laugh or cry sort of choices, because they're just they don't get it, and I think to some extent regarding the issues of trans people and non-binary people and pan and many of the other words, because it really is LGBTQI plus now, because we're just there's not enough letters here, because sexuality has become, and gender, it's all become very fluid, and it's going to be very interesting for younger people. I actually sing in Eugene. We have a group called Soramundi, the Lesbian Chorus of Eugene. Soramundi means Sisters of the World. This is their 30th year in existence. They've been around for 30 years, and it started as a group of lesbian women who met in the founder's living room, and has grown to be over 100 women who sing under the banner of Lesbian Chorus. But some are straight, some are bi, some are trans, some are non-binary. I mean, there's, it's just this wonderful collection of people.
Who cares? They all make music, which is wonderful. Could I ask you to do something for us? Because one of the things we've been doing lately on It Matters Radio is we've been, during the week, adding something to watch, a song or something. Maybe you could get us a YouTube that you like from that group, and send us the link, and then Monica, who does all the tech work. By the way, people, speaking about sex roles, and okay, Monica's the tech person here. Well, no.
We all have to know
I read books.
And I'm female.
But Monica will put that up.
I will be
come
happy
back during the week, folks.
I will be happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Send that to us and we'll get it up, because I would love people to hear it. Who doesn't love music anyway?
And it's an incredible sound for over 100 people who all, none of them have auditioned. None of them are. These are all just people who love to sing. But part of where I was going with that is, it started as a group of lesbians, and then as it expanded, the gay community has to do its own education and their own acceptance of things, So, and I think that we've gone through that with bisexuals, and we're going through that and continue through that with trans and non-binary. As an English teacher, the whole, he, she, their thing is very hard for me to break that.
It's very interesting, because I've always had problems with pronouns.
Yeah.
If anybody who knows me will know, I always say, stop talking pronouns at me, because then I have to figure out who you mean. But years ago, I had my first pronoun crisis with the word God, because I didn't want a male God, I didn't want a female God. And while I had less problem with a plural God, other people seemed to have a great deal of trouble with me using a plural God. So I just stopped using pronouns with God, or I tried to, and I just say God, 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 or the divine, or whatever, Allah. But I just use synonyms for God and don't use a pronoun. Well, now, of course, when I'm talking about, even if I am talking about a singular person, unless I know their gender selection, I refer to them by they, because that's become the norm. And it's just fascinating to me that how, just thinking about pronouns that way, dear sir or madam, no, that doesn't work for me. So I have to find a way around it. So now I can't say dear they.
Hello, that's it.
So what I end up is valued person or valued reader or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, what
Yeah,
else can you
yeah, you
do?
find a way around it, and it's interesting when you mention God, because one of the things I do when I'm not writing is I edit a lot of other people's work, and that's one of those words where whether it's the big G or the little G when it comes to dialogue or narration, is it can be either,
Mhm.
and it depends on the value of the word placed on it by the author, really, and
Right.
so I think it's sometimes kind of telling people who know that, whether they want it to be little G or big G. So,
You know what, guys? It's already been a half hour and our time's running out. And I hope you'll come back again sometime because I'm sure we can
Oh,
go on and
yes.
on.
I
Folks, before we go off the air, we want to make sure you get this. It is called Furthest from the Gate. It is by Ann Roberts, who has been our guest today. And it is a delightful read. It is a read that will make you think. I will tell you that you will find yourself laughing. You will find yourself crying. And sometimes you'll find yourself doing both at the same time.
And that makes a good book and a good
That is
read.
a great book.
thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, folks, we're going to have a trailer from Anne's book. And
The new book.
yes, the
Yeah.
new book. So that's something very special. And with that, we're going to say goodbye to our wonderful guest. I thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your work and your thoughts with us. And Ken, as always, it's been a pleasure.
Mine too.
Thank you
Okay.
both very much. It was a lot of fun. I'm happy to come back anytime.
All right, Anne. Thanks so much. And here we go. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Roberts, and this is a reading from Furthest from the Gate, a story of a coming-of-age story involving Kate Mitchell, a young girl as she grows up and realizes that she's gay. This particular story takes place when Kate is about 8 years old, and it's called The Omniscient Omnipotent. Third grade will always be remembered as the most trying of my educational years, mainly because of my teacher, Mrs. Angle, but also because of Sister Mary Elizabeth Donahue, my CCD teacher. Besides enduring Mrs. Angle 5 days a week, I got the privilege of sitting through 90 minutes of instruction from the oldest nun on the face of the earth, a nun who believed Vatican II and the 20th century had never happened. Catholic Christian doctrine is a fancy name for Sunday school. Every week after Mass, I and the other 8-year-old martyrs suffered under Sister Mary's tutelage, learning what we'd done to deserve the fiery pits of hell or what we'd do to get there. She tried her best to scare us, but no one took her seriously. What could happen if we misbehaved or didn't do our homework? She could throw us out, but secretly everyone was praying that that would happen anyway. The only real leverage she had against us was our parents, but since most of them had experienced CCD, they were tacitly sympathetic, insisting that we go, but understanding that it was to follow church doctrine and ease their soaring Catholic guilt. Thus, by divine perpetual motion, I found myself facing Sister Mary every Sunday, a rather unpleasant sight on the Lord's Day. We called her Scary Mary. Her face reminded me of a Rand McNally road map, a bunch of bisecting lines with a few points of interest along the way, most especially her eyes. They receded back into her head, making the sockets appear large and empty. As for the rest of her body, who knew? She could have been a minotaur underneath her robe, and no one would have suspected. As third graders, it was Scary's responsibility to prepare us for the third of the 7 sacraments, confession, which required 8-year-olds to sit in a tiny dark room, the only furniture a kneeler facing a small curtained window. The priest sat in an adjacent room, and when he heard a confessor enter, he slid the partition open but kept the curtain drawn. Thus, the confession could be heard, but the identity of the sinner remained anonymous. I still remember the claustrophobic feeling that came over me every time I knelt in the confessional. Only in the name of God could a child be locked in a closet for his own good. As Sister Mary explained the concept of listing our sins for Father Horton and his assignment of penance, the class was enthralled. Sister Mary assured us that Father Horton received divine guidance and that our punishments for offending the Lord were sound. Pretty Alicia Walker looked up, her eyes popping out of her head. "You mean God talks to Father Horton?" "Of course," Sister Mary twittered. Although she looked like a hag, Sister Mary had the voice of a bird. "Why doesn't he talk to me?" Joey Dougal stammered. "Because you are not a priest." "Does he talk to you, Sister Mary?" Alicia asked. Sister Mary stuck her hands in her robe and paced the floor. "Well, Alicia, God talks to me, but it's not the same. Priests have a direct link to the Almighty, something the rest of us lack." Joey Dougal almost leapt out of his chair. "You mean like a hotline to God? Like the red phone the president carries around?" "Exactly," Sister Mary exclaimed. She had to be thrilled. This was the most excited anyone in the class had ever been about anything. "So if I became a priest, I could talk to God too," Joey shouted. "Of course," Sister Mary agreed, already picturing Joey in his vestments. Joey slugged me in the arm. "Ha ha, Katie, I can be a priest and you can't, ha." I shot out of my chair, ready to pummel him. "You shut up, Joey. I can do anything you can do." I turned toward Sister Mary for affirmation. "I could be a priest. Couldn't I, Sister Mary?" She sighed. "No, Katie. The priesthood is for men only. Women become nuns." A touch of remorse permeated her voice. I stamped my foot. "But I want to be a priest." "Now, Katie, you can be a nun," she said patiently. "But I can't be a priest." I slumped back in my chair and forgot where I was. "That's a pisser." Sister Mary's face turned dark brown. Some people turn red when they're furious, but Scary looked like she'd just come back from vacation in Florida. A long finger emerged from her robe and pointed at me. "Kate Mitchell, you will not say that word again in this class, and I expect you to tell Father Horton about your foul mouth next week during confession." I assumed a penitent pose, bowing my head and staring at my desk, all the while thinking about what a stupid religion I was stuck in. I could be a much better priest than Joey. He was so damn klutzy. He'd probably dropped the baby the first time he performed a baptism. It seemed so unfair, and I knew it was wrong. I'd heard a woman named Gloria Steinem talk about something called sexism. I wasn't sure I totally understood it, but I was pretty sure she wasn't Catholic. There was something else that really bothered me. Sister Mary had said that God talked to Father Horton. It didn't take a genius to understand the implications. God knew everything, which meant that if God was a blabbermouth, then Father Horton knew everything too. This scared the hell out of me. I thought of the multitude of sins I'd committed just in the past week. I thought of the donuts my friend Robbie Wentworth and I had stolen last week during fellowship. Then there was Janie Freeman's Barbie doll, now burned beyond recognition and hiding under my bed. What about the pet lizard I'd secretly been keeping in my dresser drawer? It was amazing Father Horton had time to say Mass in the midst of tallying my transgressions alone. And what about past sins? I thought of Robbie and me in the bathroom playing doctor. And Kimmy Lancaster, a little girl that I really liked looking at. Sister Mary had once mentioned homo-somethings and said they were the worst type of sinners. At the time, I'd thought of Kimmy Lancaster, but I couldn't remember why. My hand shot up in the air. "Sister Mary!" Sister Mary ignored my violent waving until she'd finished telling a story about a little boy who'd gone to hell. "Yes, Katie?" My heart thumped. "Sister Mary, you said God talked to Father Horton, right?" Her face browned. "Yes, Katie, that is correct." "And God knows everything?" She noticed my panic expression, and at first she looked puzzled, but then a smile crossed her face as our minds met. "Yes, Katie, everything." By Sunday, I was an emotional disaster. I had spent the entire week thinking of confession and terrorizing my family and friends, hoping to camouflage my thoughts of Kimmy Lancaster with these recent sins. I prayed I was right, otherwise the 3 weeks grounding I'd just received for jumping off the roof and into the mulberry tree would be in vain. As I waited my turn to enter the confessional, I wrung my hands and stared at the enormous crucifix above the altar. The other kids ahead of me had made lists of their sins, unaware that Father Horton already knew what they were going to say. I watched them read and reread their papers, attempting to commit their sins to memories before they entered the dark closet. Joey Dougal exited the confessional, mumbling his penance over and over. Penance was the other thing that worried me. What would be my punishment? Would this involve physical labor? Would it affect my allowance? What if I couldn't do the penance? Would I have to go back to confession? Before I realized what was happening, I'd entered the confessional. While the door was open, the room didn't seem so bad. But as I knelt, the door swung shut and the room turned black. I could hear myself breathing and the faint murmur of Father Horton talking to the sinner on the other side. My eyes adjusted and I looked around the confessional, straining to see what lurked in the corners. I thought of two glimmering eyes. God's eyes. Grandma always said God made his presence known when you least expected him. I wondered if that was how he knew everything, by hiding in the shadows and lurking in closets. It occurred to me that God must be pretty busy. There was a good chance that he could only talk to Father Horton once in a while. Since there were lots of other priests, surely Father Horton wasn't the only one talking to God. I sighed with relief as I pictured God with his priest yellow pages in hand and the phone cradled against his ear. I was so deep in thought that I didn't hear the window slide open. The patient father must have sat there for a good minute before saying, "Hello? Is anyone there?" I nearly fell off the kneeler at the sound of his baritone voice. It made me wonder if I wasn't speaking to the Almighty himself. This was a possibility I hadn't explored. Maybe God possessed Father Horton during confession, just like in that book, The Exorcist, a book I wasn't even supposed to touch, but had during my rampant sin spree that week. He waited. I waited. He coughed. "You may begin, my child." My mind went blank. This was like some horrible test. I stammered. He kibitzed and gave me the first line. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." I continued, and things were going smoothly until we got to the actual confessing part. I didn't know what to say. I certainly knew what I wasn't going to say. "Father, if you're a priest, don't you already know my sins?" He coughed. "What do you mean, my child?" "Well, Sister Mary said you talked with God, and since he knows all our sins, I thought he would have told you before I got here." More coughing. What Sister Mary meant was, "Why don't you just refresh my memory?" "Oh, okay." I hadn't counted on Father Horton being forgetful. "I said pisser to Sister Mary. She told me to tell you that." "And a good thing you did." I rattled off the many childhood pranks I'd pulled that week, and I wondered if I should mention the donut heist. "Is that all, my child?" "Father, can I confess someone else's sins?" "What?" "Robbie Wentworth stole 4 donuts during fellowship last week." "Oh, he did he?" "Yeah, 2 Boston cream, a glazed, and a chocolate honey dip. I mean, he was going to take more, but Mr. Mathers turned around." "Why did Robbie take 4 donuts? He was hungry?" "I don't think so," Father Horton replied. "I think you stole those donuts and you feel guilty." I pictured his steel eyes staring at me just like they had last year when a few of us put milk in the holy water. "Katie, are you all right?" "Yes, Father." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He'd said my name! "Katie, you stole those donuts, didn't you?" "Yes, Father." "Very well. Say 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers." "Yes, Father." "And in the future, Katie, do not steal and do not lie." I nodded, forgetting that he couldn't see me. He started to shut the window. "Father?" The window stopped. I could see his silhouette clearly. "Yes, my child." "How did you know it was me?" There was a long pause. "How do you think I knew?" I gasped, ran out of the confessional, and slammed the door. Several of the other children stared at me, and the next student opened the door carefully, wondering what lurked on the other side. I leaned against the wall for a few seconds. When I finally started breathing again, I heard laughter. Someone must have been confessing something really funny, because Father Horton was laughing hysterically.